Mum, we've sold the ranch and the cattle. The words hit me like a physical blow, sharper and more vicious than any Texas sun. For a moment, I just sat there, my mind blank, a buzzing sound filling my ears. My heart pounded against my ribs, a desperate drum against an unyielding cage. It was Ryan's voice on the other end, my son's voice, but it was cold, clipped, and devoid of emotion. Just like that, in a single brutal sentence, he had erased 70 years of history, of memories, of a life built on this land. My hands, still holding the half-finished scarf I was knitting, trembled. The world tilted on its axis, and I knew, in that instant, everything had changed. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening from in the comments. The heat shimmered over the dusty yard, making the air thick and heavy. The sound of cicadas was a deafening buzz, a constant presence on the ranch since early June. I was sitting on the porch swing, the rhythmic creak a comforting backdrop to my thoughts. But all comfort had evaporated with Ryan's call. The phone was still warm in my hand. He hadn't even waited for me to reply, to ask questions. Just a flat statement and then silence. I tried to call him back, but the line was dead. He had blocked me. Both of them. My two sons, Ryan and Mike, had planned this. I could feel it in the cold certainty of his voice. I walked into the kitchen. The room was just as I had left it that morning. The coffee pot still had a little liquid at the bottom. The morning newspaper lay on the table, a list of chores still on the fridge. It was all so normal, so mundane, yet it felt like a museum piece, a relic of a life that no longer existed. My chest tightened, a familiar pain that had been a constant companion since Robert, my husband, passed away 6 months ago. He was the one who had built all of this, who had loved this land with every fibre of his being. I could almost hear his low laugh, his strong voice. "Don't you worry, Evelyn," he would say. "We've got all we need." I remembered the conversation like it was yesterday. It was the night before he died. He had pulled me close and said, "Promise me, my love, you won't let them change who you are." The boys, they don't understand the value of this place. They see a number, not a legacy. His words had been a gentle warning, a plea, and I, in my naive grief, had promised. Now their betrayal felt not just like an attack on me, but on his memory. But a strange calm settled over me. It was a clarity that had been missing since his death. The grief, the sadness, the feeling of being lost, it all receded, replaced by a cold, sharp determination. I walked past the living room and into Robert's study, a room I hadn't set foot in since the day of his funeral. The scent of pipe tobacco and old paper still lingered in the air. I went straight to the old wooden desk, the one he had built with his own hands when we first moved in 50 years ago. I pulled open the top drawer and found it there, a manila envelope with my name, Evelyn, written in his unmistakable scrawl. I sat in his worn leather chair, the leather creaking in protest. My fingers trembled as I touched the envelope, the paper feeling so fragile yet holding so much weight. I hadn't looked at it after he died, too consumed by the pain. But now, after Ryan's call, a different kind of pain, a more purposeful kind, was pushing me. I opened the flap and pulled out the contents. There were legal documents, bank statements, and a handwritten letter from Robert. I unfolded the letter first, his familiar handwriting bringing a lump to my throat. "My dearest Evelyn," it began. "If you are reading this, I am no longer with you. I have a secret, my love. A secret I've kept for us. I wanted to protect you from the burden of wealth and from the desires of others. But now, it's all yours. The ranch, my love. It's just the beginning of the story. I read on, my eyes scanning the pages with increasing disbelief. The documents, the statements, the numbers. He had been so much more than a simple cattle rancher. He had been a brilliant businessman, an investor who had quietly built an empire in silence. I was not a poor widow. I was a wealthy woman. The pain in my chest, the one that had been there for 6 months, finally subsided. For the first time, I felt a kind of peace, a quiet power. My 2 sons thought they had left me with nothing, but what they didn't know was that my story was just about to begin. The silence that followed reading Robert's letter was profound, broken only by the loud ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I sat there in his chair, the legal papers spread across the heavy oak desk, struggling to reconcile the simple rancher I had married 50 years ago with the man revealed in these documents. The man I knew wore dusty jeans, smelled of cattle and hay, and worried about the spring planting. The man laid bare on these pages dealt in holding companies, real estate trusts, and portfolios I couldn't even pronounce. I wasn't just looking at a few successful investments. I was looking at an intricate financial fortress. The ranch, the 1,200 acres of land my sons thought they had liquidated, was merely one small asset within a massive trust. Robert had established something called the Mesa Verde Group, LLC, which, according to the documents, held ownership of everything from commercial properties in Dallas to oil leases in Oklahoma. And the most shocking part was the final line of the will. I, Evelyn Martha, was the sole beneficiary and the controlling partner of the entire group. My net worth, calculated conservatively in the latest statement, was a figure so high it felt absurd, easily 20 times what Ryan and Mike must have netted from the fraudulent sale of the ranch. I spent the next few hours poring over the documents. Robert's handwritten instructions were meticulous. He explained he had kept the wealth a secret to ensure our life remained grounded and peaceful, shielded from the greed he had seen corrupt other families. He had foreseen the possibility of this very betrayal. The last thing he wrote was a simple instruction: use this, my love, not for revenge, but for education. Education, that was the key. My sons saw my life as an inconvenience to be managed, a problem to be liquidated. They didn't just take my home. They stripped me of my dignity, believing I was a helpless widow. I had to let them realize the true, devastating consequences of their actions before I could reveal the ultimate truth. The following morning, I called Mr. Thomas, Robert's longtime lawyer. Mr. Thomas had served as the family attorney for decades, handling everything from land deeds to estate planning. I drove into town, wearing my plainest dress and a look of practiced sorrow. His office was on the 6th floor of the only skyscraper in our small town, overlooking the vast fields that once belonged to us. Mr. Thomas, a man whose face was usually as steady as granite, looked genuinely troubled as he ushered me in. "Evelyn, I'm so sorry about the boys," he said, shaking his head. "They came in last month, rushing the paperwork through. They told me you were in a fragile state, that you had consented to the sale of the cattle and the acreage. I had my doubts, but they had power of attorney." I cut him off gently. "I know, Thomas. I'm not here to grieve. I'm here to work." I placed the manila envelope on his enormous mahogany desk. His eyes widened as he read Robert's final letter and quickly skimmed the financial summaries. The sound of him clearing his throat was the loudest thing in the room. "Evelyn, this is beyond anything I could have imagined," he stammered, adjusting his glasses. "Robert, He truly was a master of his craft. He built a silent empire. He did, I agreed. And now I need you to help me control it. I want to buy back the ranch, Thomas, discreetly. I need you to initiate the process to nullify the sale to whatever shell corporation Ryan and Mike used. The original deed was never theirs to sell, regardless of any fabricated power of attorney. We can do that immediately, Thomas confirmed, regaining his professional composure. The sale was pushed through at a deeply discounted price, less than $8 million for 1,200 acres and the herd. It was a clear rush job. Good, I said, a slow, calculated smile spreading across my face. I want you to proceed with the legal maneuvers, but with absolute secrecy. I also need you to make some subtle changes to the management of our Dallas properties. Those properties are key. For now, Thomas, the world still needs to believe I am just a poor, abandoned widow. Mr. Thomas looked at me with a newfound respect, a glimmer of excitement in his aged eyes. A fascinating strategy, Evelyn. What exactly are you planning for your sons when they return? Nothing, Thomas, I replied, standing up to leave. I'm not planning anything for them. They are planning their own fate. I am merely setting the stage for their education. The flight back from Geneva landed at Dallas/Fort Worth International Airport, a brutal return to reality for Ryan and Mike. They called me right away, not from the ranch, but from a temporary rental near the city. They wanted to clarify the situation, as Ryan put it, but I knew what they really wanted was to establish damage control. The very next day, they showed up at the house unannounced. I was outside, tending to Robert's prize-winning rose bushes. I made sure I was wearing my oldest gardening clothes, faded denim overalls, and a worn straw hat. The picture of a tired, simple farm widow. I even smeared a little dirt on my cheek for good measure. Their car, a sleek black SUV they must have rented, pulled up the long gravel driveway. They stumbled out, looking exactly as I had expected. Mike, the younger one, had a forced smile that didn't reach his anxious eyes. Ryan, the calculating one, was trying to maintain an air of confidence, but his expensive European suit looked wrinkled and out of place. "Mum," Ryan started, rushing over with an awkward half-hug that smelled faintly of stale airplane cabin and desperation. "We are so sorry we had to be so abrupt on the phone. We didn't want you to worry about the details." "The details?" I repeated, my voice soft and slightly shaky, playing the role perfectly. "The sale of the ranch, Ryan. The loss of a home Robert and I built 50 years ago. Those details." "Look, Mum, it was a necessary business decision," Mike interjected, stepping carefully over a rose bed. "The ranch was losing money. The cattle market is volatile. We saw a chance to liquidate a failing asset and multiply the value 10 times over with the European venture." I leaned on my hoe, fixing my gaze on them. "And how did that European venture turn out, boys?" Ryan immediately jumped in, his composure cracking just a bit. "It's complicated, Mum. There were unforeseen complications. We had a minor setback, but it's nothing we can't handle. That's why we're here." "To handle it," I nodded slowly. "So you sold off your family's history, moved my money, and now you're back, with nothing to show for it but an empty bank account and an urgent need to handle things." Mike's face turned slightly red. "We didn't touch your money, Mum. We transferred your $2, $4 million share of the sale to your account, just like we promised." I gave them a sad, wounded look. "Oh, that's right. My $2.4 million. Such generosity. After telling me you were going to multiply it tenfold. But I suppose that's all I can expect from my successful businessmen's sons, isn't it?" Ryan stepped closer, trying the emotional approach. "Mum, don't be like that. We love you. We just thought you deserved to live a life of comfort, away from the dust and the toil of the ranch. We even looked at a lovely condo for you in the city. It has a pool and everything." "A condo," I murmured, looking out at the endless horizon of land that Robert and I had nurtured. "That's very thoughtful of you." I allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of their lie and my apparent devastation crush the air between us. This was the moment for them to solidify their mistake. "So where will you boys be staying?" I finally asked. "You're welcome to use your old rooms, but I imagine you'll prefer your elegant city life." Ryan exchanged a glance with Mike, a silent confirmation of their plan. "Actually, Mum, that's where we need a small favor. We need to stay at the ranch for a while. It's important for our investment partners to see we still have substantial assets while we sort out the cash flow issue." "Of course, sons," I replied, my voice breaking just slightly. "This is still your home, no matter what you did to it. I wouldn't dream of abandoning my boys when they need me." I saw the relief wash over their faces, immediately followed by that familiar glint of arrogance. They thought they had secured a temporary base of operations and the unconditional support of their foolish old mother. They believed the game was already over and they had won. But as I watched them unload their expensive leather luggage and head toward the house, I walked back to the rose bushes, my back to them. My faint smile returned, wider and more determined this time. The stage was set. The two-act play of their downfall had just begun, and they didn't even know they were the leading men. I knew exactly where that $2.4 million had gone, and I knew exactly where my family's real fortune lay hidden. And soon, so would they. The following week settled into an uncomfortable routine, a theatrical performance where I was the main actress and my two sons were the oblivious audience. Ryan and Mike, assuming the role of the ranch's temporary masters, quickly made themselves at home. Except their version of at home was a stark contrast to the values Robert and I had always upheld. They spent their days glued to their laptops and cell phones, conducting panicked, hushed conversations with people I assumed were former partners or creditors. They dressed in expensive, ill-fitting European clothes even for breakfast, completely out of place against the backdrop of our rustic wood and leather furniture. They never ventured out to the barns, never spoke to old Sam, the ranch hand who had worked for us for 40 years, and certainly never offered to help with the household chores. They were city slickers, playing house in the country, and their contempt for the simple life was palpable. Their conversation had mostly revolved around the supposed value of the ranch they had sold, and how much more they could have gotten if they hadn't been forced to liquidate so quickly. They often spoke in financial jargon that was meant to exclude and impress me. "Mike, the market correction on the cattle was brutal," Ryan would say, sighing dramatically over the imported coffee Mike was now brewing instead of my dependable percolator blend. "We lost at least $500,000 in potential capital gains just by closing the sale when we did. It was a disaster, timing-wise." Mike would nod glumly. "And that European deal, Ryan? I mean, we risked all $8 million and got nothing. We need a quick injection of capital, or the penalties on that short-term bridge loan are going to bury us." I, of course, played the part of the confused, aging mother perfectly. I would hover near the table, clutching my cup of tea, and ask a seemingly innocent question. $8 million, dear? That sounds like so much money. Where do you find that much money, Ryan?" Ryan would barely look up from his screen. "Mum, please. It's investment capital. Don't worry your pretty little head about it. It's complex finance." "Oh, I see," I'd respond softly, and then retreat, hiding my smirk behind the kitchen door. The irony of them discussing their $8 million loss when I was the one who had quietly transferred the actual $2. 4 million from the ranch sale into a separate, untraceable account, which was a mere drop in my financial ocean, was almost too much to bear. In the afternoons, I continued my real work. I would drive into town, ostensibly for groceries, but my real destination was Mr. Thomas's office. We spent hours structuring the legal counterattack. The process of invalidating the ranch sale was already underway. The ranch, now temporarily owned by a shell corporation named Prairie Wind Acquisitions, a name I chose for its complete anonymity, was being meticulously prepared for its true owner's return. "We are ready to serve the notice, Evelyn," Mr. Thomas Jamus told me one Thursday afternoon. "The paperwork confirming the fraudulent power of attorney is solid. We can reclaim the deed this week." "Not yet, Thomas," I replied, looking out at the skyline of the city, a tangible symbol of the financial world Robert had quietly mastered. "They haven't suffered enough for their self-pity to turn into genuine humility. We need to wait for their desperation to reach its peak. We need a catalyst." The catalyst came the next day, right on schedule. I was sitting at the kitchen table, watching the boys nervously pace. Their whispered calls had grown louder, more agitated. Then, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friendly, neighborly chime. It was a rapid, insistent hammering. I opened the door to find two tall, imposing men in expensive, dark suits and sunglasses. They didn't look like investors. They looked like enforcers. "We're looking for Ryan and Michael," the taller one stated, his voice flat and intimidating. "We represent a private lender who is very interested in the collateral they used for their recent overseas investment." Ryan and Mike froze in the living room, their faces draining of color. The sudden presence of these men, the immediate, inescapable intrusion of their disastrous financial reality into my quiet home, was the perfect twist I needed. I stepped aside, letting the harsh truth walk right through my front door. "Oh dear," I said, adopting my best look of bewildered panic. "I'm afraid I don't understand any of this. What collateral are you talking about? This is just a poor old farmhouse." The man gave me a thin, cynical smile. "They know what collateral, ma'am, and we're here to discuss its immediate repayment. They have 48 hours to settle their debt, or we start taking action on their assets, starting with anything they own." Ryan, terrified, finally found his voice. "Mum, get back inside. This has nothing to do with you." "Doesn't it, Ryan?" I asked, my voice still sweet and bewildered, but my eyes glinted with purpose. "I thought you said everything was fine. You told me not to worry my pretty little head about any of it." I watched the color drain from their faces completely. They were trapped, exposed and helpless. The walls they had built of arrogance and deceit had crumbled in an instant. This was far better than any eviction notice. This was pure, immediate terror. And it was just the beginning of their education. The visit from the two imposing men, who introduced themselves as collectors for a private equity firm, instantly shattered the facade Ryan and Mike had desperately tried to maintain. The immediate terror in their eyes was palpable, and it was a satisfaction far deeper than any quick financial revenge. After the men left, promising a return in 48 hours with legal injunctions, the house descended into chaos. The brothers, who moments ago were masters of international finance, were reduced to panicked teenagers. "Ryan, what are we going to do?" Mike whispered, running his hand through his already disheveled hair. "They meant it. They'll seize everything. They'll come after our apartment in Dallas. We can't let Mum see this." "She already saw it, you idiot," Ryan snapped, pacing the living room rug. His voice was raw, stripped of its arrogance. "We need capital, and we need it now. That 2.4 million we transferred to her account. We need to get it back." They turned to me, their eyes wide and pleading, suddenly remembering the existence of their mother, the one asset they thought they could always manipulate. I was sitting calmly on the sofa, clutching my tea mug, playing the part of the horrified spectator. 24 hours, I repeated faintly. They only gave you 24 hours to pay back what exactly? I don't understand any of this, boys. Mum, please. It's a temporary issue, Ryan lied, trying to sound authoritative, but his voice shook. We just need to access the funds from the sale. That 2.4 million is sitting in your bank account, doing nothing. If you just transfer it back to our investment account, we can cover the debt and save everything. I gave them a look of bewildered innocence. The bank account? Oh dear. I don't know anything about that. Robert always handled the money. I don't even know the password. This was the core of their despair. They had been so consumed by their greed to rush the ranch sale that they hadn't bothered to secure the simple password to the primary joint account Robert and I shared. They simply assumed I would have access, and more importantly, that I would willingly give them the money. Mike pleaded, his face etched with genuine fear. Mum, you have to help us. If we don't pay them, they will start selling off things. Our cars, our watches. They'll bankrupt us. We'll lose everything. Everything? I questioned, my eyes intentionally drifting toward a worn, leather-bound photo album resting on the side table. You already sold our everything when you sold the ranch, didn't you? The remark landed with a thud. They flinched, but the immediate threat of ruin quickly pushed any fleeting guilt aside. That's different, Mum. That was just an asset. This is our entire future. We need that money, Ryan yelled, finally dropping the pretense of respect. And what about my future, Ryan? I asked, my voice still quiet, still controlled, but with an underlying steel they had never heard before. You left me with a small fraction of what Robert and I built, assuming I would just fade away into a city condo. You didn't think about my future then. Why should I worry about yours now? They stared at me, seeing a glimpse of resistance, a crack in the fragile persona of the heartbroken widow. They quickly switched tactics, trading aggression for desperate manufactured love. Mum, you are the most generous person in the world, Mike said, suddenly placing a clammy hand on my shoulder. You wouldn't let your own sons fall into ruin. We are your family. We need you to go to the bank right now and get that money for us. This was the moment for the next layer of my strategy. I couldn't simply refuse. I had to make them believe I was trying, only to have the system they exploited crush them further. I'll try, boys. I'll call Mr. Thomas, I conceded, reaching for the phone. I then put on a dramatic show of calling Thomas, speaking loud enough for them to hear. Thomas, it's Evelyn. My sons. They are having some trouble with the money from the sale. They need to access the $2.4 million immediately. Can you help me transfer it? I paused, listening to Thomas, who was playing his part beautifully from his distant, soundproof office. Oh, what's that, Thomas? There's a hold on the money? A financial investigation? Why? Because the sale of the ranch was rushed and legally questionable? I gasped dramatically, covering my mouth with my hand. And the funds are frozen until the courts can verify the legitimate transfer of assets? For how long? 6 weeks? I hung up, placing the phone back in the cradle as if it were a dangerous snake. The money is frozen, I announced, looking at my 2 crestfallen sons. Mr. Thomas said the rapid sale of a large asset using an old power of attorney flagged the transfer. The courts have placed a hold on the 2.4 million while they investigate the legitimacy of the entire transaction. Ryan and Mike stood still, utterly speechless. The fear in their eyes was no longer about losing their assets. It was a fear born of complete powerlessness. The very system they used to betray me was now the cage that trapped them. The money they thought was their lifeline was now locked away, untouchable. 6 weeks, Mike whispered, staring blankly into space. We have 48 hours. We're ruined. I walked past them, my shoulders straight, a silent strength radiating from me. I had given them their first taste of genuine consequences, and the flavor was bitter. As I headed to the study, I knew my private conversation with Thomas had set a far more insidious trap in motion. The legal battle to prove the sale was fraudulent, to make the ranch belong to the holding company again, was proceeding with fierce, quiet efficiency. The boys had nowhere to run, and no one to turn to. Their education and my reclaimed dignity were worth every painful second of this performance. The deadline, 48 hours, came and went, replaced by a suffocating, hostile silence. The two debt collectors didn't return, which only heightened the tension. Ryan and Mike spent that time in a frantic, losing battle, trying to find a way to access the frozen $2.4 million. They hired their own aggressive, high-priced lawyer in Dallas, a man who promised to unfreeze the capital in 24 hours, but only succeeded in draining the last of their meager emergency funds. The stress turned them toxic. They were no longer the arrogant businessmen. They were cornered animals, snapping at each other and casting accusatory glances my way. "It's your fault, Mike," Ryan hissed one evening while pacing the kitchen. "You were supposed to check the power of attorney paperwork. If Mom had just signed the updated one when Dad died, this $2.4 million wouldn't be stuck in probate investigation." "My fault?" Mike shot back, slamming his laptop shut. "You were the one who rushed the sale. You said we needed the cash now for the Swiss opportunity. We sold $12 million worth of assets for $8 million just to move fast. We looked like fools." I listened to this exchange from the living room, knitting needles clicking steadily. Their desperation was my soundtrack. This was exactly what Robert had warned me about, how money could strip away decency, replacing fraternal love with venomous blame. The final hammer blow came on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't the private collectors who showed up. It was a uniformed county sheriff, serving a very official-looking document. I watched from the window as the sheriff posted a large, stark white notice on the main gate, right next to the worn R. Martha Ranch sign. Ryan and Mike, having seen the official vehicle, rushed out in a panic. They returned minutes later, their faces pale and their hands shaking. Ryan held the paper as if it were contaminated. "What is it, boys?" I asked, my voice calm as I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. Ryan didn't answer right away. He just stared at the document, his eyes scanning the harsh, legal language. Mike finally spoke, his voice thin and broken. "Mum, this is a legal injunction. It's from a company called Prairie Wind Acquisitions. They are claiming ownership of the ranch." I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Claiming ownership? But you boys sold the ranch weeks ago, didn't you?" "Yes, but this notice says the original sale was fraudulent due to procedural errors concerning the power of attorney and the estate's primary beneficiary," Ryan explained, the words sounding hollow. "They're citing breach of contract and demanding the immediate return of the deed." This was the first phase of Mr. Thomas's plan, executed with surgical precision. The legal fiction was flawless. The ranch had been fraudulently sold, and now the legitimate owner, my shell corporation, was reclaiming its property. The original buyers, who were also my corporation, had discovered the fraud and were demanding rectification. "So what does that mean?" I asked, playing dumb. "It means the sale is nullified," Mike whispered, sinking onto the nearest chair. "The ranch is no longer theirs to sell. And since we already spent all the buyer's money, we have to pay it back. The injunction demands we pay back the full $8 million purchase price immediately, plus legal fees. The number $8 million hung in the air, a colossal, insurmountable weight. It was the crushing reality of debt that was meant to break them completely. But the ranch, it's ours, isn't it? I asked, gently twisting the knife. Since the sale is off, we still own the land, don't we? Ryan shook his head slowly, his eyes wide with the full horror of their situation. No, Mum. The injunction states that since the original deed was transferred under fraudulent pretenses, the current party, Prairie Wind Acquisitions, is taking immediate possession to secure the asset, while the court determines the final ownership. They are demanding we vacate the property in 72 hours. 72 hours. They had been kicked out of their supposed luxury apartments in Europe by circumstance, and now they were being legally evicted from the family home by an invisible entity. They were homeless, penniless, and indebted to the tune of $8 million, all while the frozen $2, $4 million, the money they had stolen, sat tantalizingly out of reach in a frozen account. We have nowhere to go, Mum, Mike admitted, the fight finally draining out of him. He looked utterly defeated. We have no house, no money, and our lawyer just told us he's withdrawing due to non-payment. I walked toward the window, looking out at the vast, sun-drenched acres of our ranch, now legally seized by my silent company. It was heartbreaking, yet necessary. You're right, boys, I said, turning back to them, my face set in an expression of deep, resigned sorrow. You have nowhere to go. You sold your own lifeline. I watched them crumble, their arrogance completely dissolving into raw, self-pitying despair. The time for subtle hints was over. They needed to hit rock bottom before they could truly appreciate the lifeline I was about to offer. Their education was almost complete, and the stage was set for the painful, final lesson. The reality of the eviction hit Ryan and Mike with the force of a physical blow. They had 72 hours to vacate the property that was no longer theirs, an asset now legally claimed by the mysterious Prairie Wind Acquisitions. The shock was so profound that their usual aggressive bickering stopped, replaced by a hollow, paralyzing despair. I allowed them a full day to wallow in their ruin. I watched them desperately try to call their former lawyer, their European partners, and anyone who might still owe them a favor, only to be met with dead ends and curt hang-ups. They were ghosts in my house, moving through the rooms, with the haunted realization that they were utterly, completely alone. The turning point came when Mike, the younger and generally softer of the two, walked into the kitchen late that evening. I was doing the dishes, a comforting, simple task. "Mum," he began, his voice thin. He sounded like a child. "Mum, I'm scared. I stopped scrubbing the plate, but I didn't turn around." "Scared of what, Mike? Losing your money? Losing your lifestyle?" "Scared of having nothing," he admitted, the forced arrogance finally gone. "We literally have nothing. The apartment in Dallas is in Ryan's ex-wife's name. Our credit is ruined. We have nowhere to go after Friday." I turned then, meeting his eyes. His fear was genuine, but his focus was still primarily on the consequence of his actions, not the action itself. "And what about me, Mike?" I asked softly. "When you and Ryan sold the ranch and left me with the frozen $2.4 million, did you ever worry about me having nothing? Did you worry about where I would go?" He looked down at his feet, shame finally touching him. "We thought you'd be fine, Mom. We thought you had plenty. We thought the money would multiply." "You didn't think, Mike. You assumed," I corrected gently. You assumed your mother's love was unconditional, and you assumed her life was less important than your ambition. You saw this ranch as a commodity, not a home. The lesson was beginning to sink in. The next morning, Ryan, the stronger personality, approached me with a different approach. Humility mixed with a calculated strategy. He was holding the eviction notice. "Mom, look, I know we messed up," he said, his tone measured and controlled. "But this Prairie Wind Acquisitions thing is clearly some ruthless hedge fund trying to seize the property for pennies. We need legal help. You still have the 2.4 million in the bank, right? Frozen or not, if you put up just $50,000 for a retainer, we can get a real lawyer, stop this eviction, and maybe even sue the original buyers for fraud." He was appealing to my protective instincts, using the very money he had stolen to try and save himself. "So you want me to use the small amount of money I have left to finance a lawsuit that only benefits you?" I asked, leaning back against the counter. "It benefits you too, Mum. If the sale is nullified, the ranch comes back to you, and we'll manage it correctly this time. We'll give you a share. You won't have to worry about the upkeep," Ryan promised, the word share tasting like ash in his mouth. I shook my head. "No, Ryan. The time for shares and correct management is over. You destroyed your credibility when you put your greed before your family. You lost the right to manage anything of mine." I could see the realization dawn on him. He wasn't just broke. He had lost all authority and respect. "So what are we supposed to do, Mum?" he finally asked, his voice cracking with defeated fury. "Just walk away? Become homeless?" This was the pivotal moment, the point where the educational revenge had to transition into healing. They had touched rock bottom. I didn't answer right away. I let them sit with the full weight of their self-inflicted misery. The next morning, Friday, was the deadline. At noon on Friday, a large moving truck, not the sheriff's car, pulled up the driveway. Two strong men in uniforms started walking toward the house. Ryan and Mike scrambled, thinking their few remaining possessions were about to be seized. I stepped onto the porch. "It's all right, boys. They're here for me." I walked over to the moving crew. "You have the address, right? The rental unit in Dallas?" "Yes, ma'am," the foreman replied. "We just need to load your essential personal items." Mike and Ryan watched in stunned silence as I pointed to a few boxes I had packed weeks ago. Photographs, Robert's favorite pipe, and my personal documents. "Mom, what are you doing?" Ryan asked, his eyes wide. "I'm leaving, Ryan," I stated plainly. "Prairie Wind Acquisitions is taking possession of the property today, as the injunction demanded. The ranch is no longer our home. I arranged a small week-to-week rental in the city. It's a very small apartment, but it's paid for, and it's mine. I don't have enough to help you, so I have to go secure my own future." I paused, letting them process the fact that their mother was abandoning them, just as they had abandoned her. The shock was the purest form of karma. "But what about us?" Mike wailed. I looked at my two sons, two grown men who had always relied on their family name and their parents' wealth. Now they were standing on a piece of land that wasn't theirs, with 72 hours of mercy already expired, facing an $8 million debt and with no job prospects. "Your men, boys," I said, picking up my small travel bag. I pulled a crisp, single $100 bill from my purse and handed it to Ryan. "This is all I can spare for now. It should cover a few nights at a cheap motel. You have your clothes and your education. Now, you have to find your own way. You told me you were great businessmen. Prove it." I got into the moving truck's cab, waving faintly as the truck began to pull away. I looked back and saw my two sons standing helplessly in the dust of the driveway, two tiny figures watching their last hope. Their mother disappear down the road. They had sold the ranch. Now they had lost it, and they had lost me too. The education had truly begun the moment the moving truck pulled away, taking me and my small collection of essential belongings with it, was one of the hardest things I had ever done. Looking in the rearview mirror, seeing my home, my beautiful sprawling ranch, disappear, felt like a deep cut. But it was a necessary sacrifice for the greater goal of education. My destination was a cramped, weekly rental unit in a less than glamorous part of Dallas, a stark contrast to the vast, open spaces of the ranch. The unit was small, smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and desperation, but it was mine. It was paid for, at least for the next 4 weeks, and that was all that mattered. My new life began immediately. The routine of tending roses and planning menus was replaced by the anxiety of urban survival. I didn't actually need to worry about money, of course. Robert's financial fortress, managed by Mr. Thomas, was silently humming in the background. My personal account, the one Ryan and Mike knew about, the one with the frozen $2.4 million, was the only thing I operated from. And since those funds were legally inaccessible, I had to act like I was broke. The silence from Ryan and Mike was deafening. I knew they were experiencing their absolute lowest point. They were adult men, raised in privilege, now stranded on the side of a country road with a $100 bill, 2 suitcases, and an $8 million debt hanging over their heads. They had to be terrified. I called Mr. Thomas the next morning, speaking in hushed tones from my rented cell phone. "Any contact from the boys?" I asked. "None, Evelyn," Thomas confirmed. "They haven't tried to call me, which means they are truly broke and too embarrassed to ask for credit. The final eviction process is complete. Prairie Wind Acquisition is now the legal owner of the ranch. The process was finalized yesterday afternoon." "Excellent," I said. "And the Dallas properties? Have you initiated the next phase?" "Yes. I've ensured that all commercial lease contracts for the office building where Ryan's old business was headquartered are absolutely watertight. No favors, no extensions. They can't run their old game from any of your properties." This was a subtle, intelligent maneuver. Ryan had always relied on the status and connections afforded by his old business address in one of Robert's premium downtown buildings. By cutting off that lifeline, without them knowing I was the landlord, I was ensuring they couldn't use their old network to pull themselves up. 2 days later, I received a shaky phone call. It was Mike. "Mom," his voice was raspy. "We're in a real bad spot. We've been sleeping in the truck for 2 nights. The motel costs too much." My heart ached, a sharp maternal pain that was difficult to suppress. I was their mother, and every instinct screamed at me to tell them the truth and end their suffering. But I remembered Ryan's cold voice on that first call. I remembered the arrogance. "I'm so sorry, Mike," I said, keeping my tone flat and even. "I told you I only have enough for myself. Have you looked for jobs?" "Jobs?" Mike sounded incredulous. "Mum, we're businessmen. We can't just flip burgers. We're dealing with an $8 million legal crisis. We need to focus on a solution, not minimum wage work." This was the core of their sickness. They still saw manual labor as beneath them, still believed they were entitled to a white-collar rescue. "Mike, if you owe that much, you need to work," I insisted. "Even flipping burgers is better than sleeping in a truck. It shows commitment." Mike sighed, clearly frustrated with my lack of understanding. "We went to the bank, Mum. We tried to argue about the frozen $2.4 million. They told us the investigation into the power of attorney fraud is being taken seriously. They said we might even face jail time if we can't prove the sale was legitimate. Jail time. The stakes had just been raised to the absolute maximum. This was the shock that would truly break them. Jail time, Mike, I gasped, injecting just the right amount of fear into my voice. Oh dear God, what have you boys done? Nothing, Mum. It was just a misunderstanding. We just need money for a good lawyer, Mike pleaded. We tried to sell Ryan's watch, but the pawn shop wouldn't give us enough. I listened to his despair. They were now selling off the trinkets of their former lives just to survive. Mike, listen to me, I said firmly. I can't help you with the money, it's frozen. But I can tell you this. If you are facing criminal charges, you need to look respectable. You need to show you are trying to be responsible. You need to get real jobs. Any job. I then offered them the only piece of genuine help they would receive for the time being. A contact for a day labor agency. The kind of place they would never in a million years have considered walking into before. There's a warehouse district on the south side. They hire movers and clean-up crew daily. Go there tomorrow morning. It's honest work. It will give you a temporary address and some dignity. Do it, Mike. For your future. Mike reluctantly agreed, his voice heavy with humiliation. He hung up, and I sank onto my rented bed, closing my eyes. I had just sent my 2 sons into the world of hard manual labor, a world they had always scorned. It was the hardest thing I had ever done as a mother, but I knew, deep down, that the healing process could only begin with the grit and dirt of true humility. The education of Ryan and Mike Martha was now happening on the streets of Dallas. The following 2 weeks were the most grueling Mike and Ryan had ever experienced. They had followed my advice, desperate enough to swallow their pride, and showed up at the day labor agency in the South Dallas warehouse district. The work was immediate, brutal, and humiliating. They spent their days hauling heavy boxes, cleaning greasy floors, and assisting moving crews, a physical shock to bodies accustomed to sitting in leather office chairs. They called me every few days, and each conversation was a testament to their deteriorating morale. Mum, you won't believe this, Ryan started during one call, his voice rough and laced with fatigue. I was moving industrial-sized refrigerators today. I hurt my back. The foreman just laughed and told me to take some aspirin and get back to work. I haven't felt this low since high school football practice. At least you're working, Ryan, I replied, my voice maintaining its carefully constructed blend of sympathy and practical distance. It's honest pay. Honest pay that barely covers the cheapest motel room we can find, Mike complained on a separate call. We had to share the room with a guy who snored so loud the walls shook, and we're still wearing the same 3 suits we brought back from Europe. We look like failed wedding planners. I knew they were exaggerating the misery slightly, but the humiliation was real. Their self-pity was slowly, agonizingly, being replaced by a grudging respect for the people they were working alongside. They were learning the value of $1 earned through sheer physical effort, a concept completely foreign to their privileged past. Meanwhile, in the quiet solitude of my rented unit, I was the one managing a billion-dollar empire. My real job began after 6 p.m. I would call Mr. Thomas, and we would review the status of the legal filings. The injunction to reclaim the ranch is irreversible, Evelyn, Thomas reported confidently. Prairie Wind Acquisitions owns the land free and clear. The original buyers, who we now represent, have recouped their $8 million from the boys' frozen account, and the debt collectors have been paid off. The bank still holds the lien, but the immediate threat of criminal charges against Ryan and Mike has been neutralized, as the court recognized they were victims of a flawed legal process. Good, I said. No jail time. That's crucial. And the frozen funds? Thomas asked. The $2.4 million remains frozen for now, Thomas. Let the bank hold it as proof of our ongoing financial distress. We don't want them to suspect I found a sudden inheritance. I then instructed Thomas on the next phase. I wanted him to discreetly buy the small, dilapidated commercial building where Ryan and Mike were currently working as day labourers. Buy the warehouse, Evelyn? That property is a wreck. Why? Because, Thomas, I want them to be working for me without knowing it, I explained. And when the time comes, I want to be the one to give them the pink slip, or rather, the chance to buy it themselves. It's the final twist of the knife before the healing begins. Thomas chuckled, a dry, approving sound. You are truly Robert's wife, Evelyn, a master strategist. The emotional turning point came 2 weeks later. Mike called me, but this time the tone was different. There was exhaustion, yes, but also a hint of self-awareness. Mom, I met a guy today, Mike said, his voice unusually soft. He's about our age. He works 2 jobs, 12 hours a day, just to send money back to his family in El Salvador. He's been doing it for 8 years. Ryan and I complained about carrying 1 box, and he carried 3 while smiling. And what did you learn from that, Mike? I learned that we never had to worry about money, but we worried all the time about the wrong things, he admitted. We treated people who worked hard like they were invisible. We were the entitled ones. We deserve this, Mom. We honestly do. This was the first genuine sign of remorse, the true recognition of their moral failure. The education was working. The final element of the plan fell into place the following week. I drove back out to the ranch, slipping past the locked gates and the Prairie Wind Acquisitions sign. I had the code, of course. The house was cold and empty, stripped of its life. But everything was clean, waiting. I went straight to Robert's study and pulled out a small, locked wooden box I hadn't opened since his death. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. For their deepest despair. Play this only when you know they are ready to listen. I drove back to my rental unit, the flash drive warm in my pocket. The next day, I called Mr. Thomas. It's time, Thomas, I said, my voice steady, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and resolve. Arrange a final meeting at your office. Tell them it's their last chance to negotiate with Prairie Wind Acquisitions before the company sells off the ranch assets permanently. This is their final ultimatum. Understood, Evelyn. I will set the stage for the meeting of a lifetime. I called Ryan and Mike. I kept my voice serious, relaying the message from Thomas. You need to go, boys, I urged them. This is your only chance to save the family legacy. Don't worry about what you wear. Just go. And listen to every word Thomas says. I want you to fight for that ranch. I hung up, knowing they had no idea they weren't just fighting for land. They were fighting for their own redemption. They were walking into the climax of the game, and the opponent, the ruthless Prairie Wind Acquisitions, was their own mother. I spent the rest of the evening preparing my presentation. The final twist, the absolute shock, was now only hours away. The moment arrived precisely at 10 o'clock on Friday morning. I was not there, of course. I was watching from a cafe across the street, nursing a single cup of black coffee, hidden behind the daily newspaper. I had told Ryan and Mike to wear their best clothes, to show respect to the buyers. But their best suits now hung loosely on their frames, wrinkled and smelling faintly of cheap motel air freshener. They walked into Mr. Thomas's imposing office building like men walking to the gallows. They looked physically smaller, defeated not just by financial ruin, but by the relentless, humiliating grind of day labor. 10 minutes later, I received a text from Mr. Thomas. The stage is yours. Come in now, Evelyn. I folded the paper, paid the waiter, and walked across the busy street. As I stepped into the elevator, I took a deep breath. The performance was about to transition from painful drama to shocking spectacle. I walked into the conference room, and the effect was immediate and total. Ryan and Mike were sitting across the large mahogany table from Mr. Thomas, their hands clasped nervously. They were mid-conversation, arguing about the validity of the $8 million payment demand. "The whole thing is rigged, Thomas," Ryan insisted, his voice cracking with frustration. "How could Prairie Wind Acquisitions legally seize the ranch when we still have the $2.4 million frozen in the bank?" Mike looked up first, his eyes widening in complete shock when he saw me standing in the doorway. He nudged Ryan hard. Ryan spun around. His jaw went slack. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I walked to the table and calmly pulled out a chair next to Mr. Thomas. I didn't sit down immediately. I just stood there, letting them absorb my presence. I was dressed in a sharp, tailored burgundy suit, the one Robert always said made me look like a force of nature. My hair was impeccably styled, and my posture was straight and unyielding. I was no longer the frail, tired widow in gardening clothes. I was a businesswoman. "Good morning, boys," I said, my voice clear and utterly devoid of the soft vulnerability they were used to. "I'm here to represent the primary beneficiary of the assets under review." "Represent who, Mum?" Mike asked, utterly bewildered. "You should be sitting with us. You're the victim here." "I am the victim, yes," I conceded, finally sitting down. I gave Mr. Thomas a subtle nod. "But I am also something else. Thomas, please inform my sons of my relationship to Prairie Wind Acquisitions." Mr. Thomas, looking entirely too satisfied, cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, allow me to clarify. Prairie Wind Acquisitions, LLC, the company that currently holds the deed to the 1,200-acre ranch and is demanding the $8 million repayment, is a subsidiary of a private holding trust established by your father, Robert Martha." He paused for dramatic effect. "And the sole controlling partner and beneficiary of that trust is your mother, Evelyn Martha." The silence that fell upon the room was absolute. It was the moment of ultimate shock. Ryan's eyes darted from Thomas to me, his face utterly blank. Mike looked as though all the air had been violently sucked from his lungs. They were facing the enemy, and the enemy was the mother they had abandoned. Ryan finally found a choked, strangled voice. You own it. You own the company that evicted us." I picked up the manila file Thomas had prepared for me, the one with the trust documents. I slid it across the table toward them. "I have owned it, in fact, since the day your father died," I stated, my voice measured and controlled. "Robert placed everything into this trust years ago, specifically to shield the real value from people who might be tempted by greed. He foresaw this day. The ranch was never the main asset. It was a decoy. Your father was a brilliant investor, boys, not just a simple farmer." I then delivered the truth with clinical precision, using the financial terms they once valued so highly. "The $8 million you thought you pocketed was paid by a subsidiary of my company. The money is simply being moved from my left pocket to my right pocket. The bank hold on the $2.4 million from the ranch sale was initiated by Mr. Thomas to halt your reckless spending. The only thing you successfully sold was the illusion of your own competence." Mike leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His humiliation was complete. "You let us think we were ruined. You watched us sleep in the truck. You sent us to haul boxes. I watched you experience the consequences of your own choices," I corrected, my gaze unyielding. "When you thought I was poor, you abandoned me without a second thought. You stripped me of my home and my dignity. Now you know the real numbers, the real money, the real power. The truth is, I could have solved all your problems with a phone call, but I chose not to, because a lesson learned without pain is a lesson quickly forgotten. I reached across the table and picked up the flash drive from the wooden box Robert had left me. I handed it to Mr. Thomas. Thomas, please play this for them. Mr. Thomas inserted the drive into his laptop. Robert's familiar, deep voice filled the room, not through the computer speakers, but from a recording he must have made years ago. If you boys are listening to this, it means you chose money over your mother's heart. You chose ambition over humility. Your mother has just shown you that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in integrity. She did this not for revenge, but because she loves you too much to let you remain greedy children. Robert's voice paused, and then the recording ended abruptly. The emotional impact was devastating. The boys weren't just shocked by the financial betrayal. They were crushed by the weight of their deceased father's final judgment. Ryan finally broke. Tears began streaming down his face, not the frustrated tears of a failed businessman, but the genuine tears of a son who had finally realized the depth of his moral failure. "We're so sorry, Mum," Ryan choked out, struggling to stand. "We didn't know the price of what we were throwing away." I watched them, the hard shell of their arrogance finally shattered. The dramatic shock of the financial reveal had perfectly set the stage for the true emotional healing to begin. The conference room fell into a long, profound silence, the air thick with unshed tears and newly understood truths. Ryan and Mike, once powerful figures in their expensive, now wrinkled suits, were utterly shattered. They had seen their father's final judgment and realized the full extent of their moral bankruptcy. Ryan, the more dominant one, was the first to speak. He didn't yell or argue. He just spoke my name, the sound laced with absolute defeat. "Mom." "Yes, Ryan," I replied, my voice softening just a fraction. The shock had done its work. The moment for cruelty was over. The moment for healing had begun. You let us sleep in that truck," he choked out, wiping tears with the back of his hand, a gesture far removed from the man who once signed multi-million-dollar deals. "You watched us work hauling trash for minimum wage when you owned companies worth millions." "And what did you learn in that truck, Ryan?" I asked, leaning forward. "Did you learn the value of the home you sold? Or did you just learn the value of a clean, warm bed?" Mike looked up, his eyes bloodshot but focused. "We learned that the man working next to us, who takes home $60 a day to feed his family, has more dignity than we ever did in our corner offices. We learned that we treated everyone who didn't have a degree or a trust fund like they were invisible. We were the worthless ones, Mum." That was the answer I had waited months to hear. They had finally grasped the difference between inherited wealth and earned dignity. "The money is still frozen, isn't it?" Mike asked, his tone now one of quiet calculation, not demand. "The $2.4 million from the ranch sale is still technically tied up, yes," I confirmed. "But the $8 million debt from the fraudulent sale has been paid off. You are legally free of the criminal charges and the creditors." Mr. Thomas handled it all. Ryan stood up slowly, walked around the table, and knelt in front of me. This was the hardest part of the entire performance. "Mom, I am so sorry," he whispered, tears wetting my skirt. "I didn't just abandon you. I treated Dad's memory like dirt. I lost my way. I let greed make me a terrible son." I reached out and gently rested my hand on his head. "I forgave you the moment you walked into that day labor agency, Ryan. Forgiveness isn't given when it's asked for. It's given when it's truly earned. You earned it by humbling yourself. Mike joined him, kneeling beside his brother. It was a tableau of complete surrender and repentance. "So what happens now, Mum?" Mike asked. "Do we go back to the ranch? Do we finally get control of the trust? We'll manage it for you, we promise." I shook my head slowly, pulling back my hand. "No, not yet. You still see the trust as your solution. I want you to see it as your safety net, not your inheritance." I turned to Mr. Thomas. "Thomas, please prepare 2 severance packages." Ryan and Mike exchanged confused glances. "Severance packages, Mum? Are you firing us from the family, Mo?" Ryan asked, fear returning to his eyes. "I am firing the spoiled children you used to be," I clarified. "Ryan, I am assigning you a small, nondescript commercial property in Dallas. It's an old warehouse." "Mike, I'm assigning you a small apartment building in a decent part of the city. These are not gifts. They are challenges." I then laid out the final terms of their education, the ultimate challenge of their redemption. These properties are valued at just under $1.5 million each, a tiny fraction of the trust's value. Mr. Thomas will set up a management contract. You will manage the leases, collect the rent, handle the maintenance, and pay the property taxes. You must live off the net profit of those 2 properties. You cannot touch the principal, and you cannot ask me for help. You have 2 years to run these properties successfully, and you must not use the name Martha. You will be known only by your first names to your tenants and contractors. I looked at them, my expression stern. If you fail, if you run the properties into the ground, you lose them both. They revert back to the trust. If you succeed, you will have proven that you can build something with honesty and hard work. Only then will we talk about the full Martha legacy. Ryan's eyes lit up, not with greed, but with purpose. "A challenge. We can do that, Mum. We will do that." "And the ranch, Mum?" Mike asked softly. "What about our home?" "The ranch belongs to Prairie Wind Acquisitions for now," I replied. "But I will let you both work there. Not as owners, but as employees. Old Sam is getting too old to handle the herd alone. You can work with him, learn the ranching business the way your father did, from the dirt up. Sam will pay you a fair wage, and you will work for it. You can stay in the old bunkhouse, no charge, as part of your employment." They were getting their home back, but on the hardest terms possible. They had to earn the right to simply live on the land they once tried to sell. Ryan stood up straight, a new kind of dignity replacing his former arrogance. "We'll do it, Mum. We'll work for Sam. We'll manage those properties. We will prove we are worthy of the name Martha." I smiled then, a genuine, warm smile that reached my eyes, the first one I had given them in months. "Good. Now go. You have a warehouse to fix up, Mike, and a herd to count, Ryan, and your mother has a foundation to establish." I watched my 2 sons, humbled and determined, walk out of the conference room. They left behind the shame of their past and carried forward the burden of their new responsibilities. The most valuable asset they were inheriting was not the wealth, but the priceless lesson of humility and hard work. The education was complete, and the healing was about to begin. 2 years passed. 2 years of quiet determination, hard work, and relentless effort that fundamentally reshaped the lives of Ryan and Mike. For me, these years were filled with purpose. I moved back to the ranch, now officially owned by the Evelyn Martha Family Trust, and spent my days working with Mr. Thomas to consolidate Robert's empire and establish the Martha Foundation for Financial Literacy. I watched my sons from a distance, receiving updates weekly from Mr. Thomas, and occasionally running into them at the general store, where they looked healthier, worn down, but undeniably dignified. Mike successfully turned the small apartment building, once a wreck, into a profitable, well-maintained asset. He learned every aspect of maintenance, tenant law, and budgeting. He even started a program offering job training to tenants who were struggling. Ryan, meanwhile, thrived in the physical demands of ranch life. He worked side by side with old Sam, learning about cattle, crops, and the unpredictable nature of the land. He traded his European suits for dusty denim, and the change was profound. He stopped talking about capital gains and started talking about rainfall and soil health. The 2-year mark arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon. I called them both to the ranch house. They walked in, not through the front door as entitled sons, but through the mudroom, wiping their boots and carrying the latest financial reports for their properties. They looked like the men Robert always hoped they would become. We sat at the old kitchen table, the one where I had read Robert's letter. Mike presented his portfolio first. "Mum, the apartment building has a 98% occupancy rate," Mike reported, his voice filled with humble pride. "We increased the net income by 30% without raising rents by focusing on efficiency and tenant retention. And we put $200,000 into a managed reserve account." Ryan followed, equally earnest. "Old Sam says I can now manage the winter feed rotation myself. I've learned more about business from him in 2 years than I did in all my years in Dallas. And Mum, the land, it's a living thing. It's not just a number." I smiled, my heart overflowing with a quiet victory that surpassed any financial gain. "You both succeeded," I said, looking from one strong, capable face to the other. "You met the challenge and you exceeded it. You learned that true wealth is built, not seized." I then presented them with 2 envelopes. "Mike, this is the deed to the apartment building. It's officially yours now. Use it to do good work." "Ryan, this is a contract," I continued. "It's a partnership agreement. You are now the official chief operating officer of the Martha Ranch, overseeing the entire 1,200-acre operation. You earn a salary, but more importantly, you earn a vested share in the future success of this land." They were stunned, but accepting. It wasn't a handout. It was a promotion earned through sweat and integrity. "And the rest of the trust, Mum?" Ryan finally asked, the question now asked with curiosity, not entitlement. "The majority of the trust's wealth will be placed into the Martha Foundation," I explained. "We will use it to fund financial literacy and sustainable farming initiatives, to teach people the very lessons you two just learned the hard way." I looked at them, my eyes shining with the love I had always held for them, a love now purified by their penance. "I want you to know this, boys. Justice was served, not as revenge for my humiliation, but as an education for your lives. The greatest asset your father ever left us was not the money, but the moral compass we finally found here, back on the dirt where we belong." Mike and Ryan stood up, and this time they didn't offer an awkward hug. They embraced me tightly, a hug filled with gratitude, respect, and a deep, shared understanding. The rift was gone. The family was healed. They had returned to the home they once threw away, not as owners, but as stewards, finally ready to honor their father's legacy. The journey of redemption is often tougher than the fall. We saw how Evelyn's hard lesson in humility healed her broken family. Tell us in the comments, if you were in Evelyn's shoes, would you have waited the full 2-year to reveal the truth? Or would you have rescued your sons sooner? Let's talk about the true cost of forgiveness.